Chapter 946, Spiritual Meat. Chapter 946, Spiritual Meat. The silver-horned mad rhinoceros once again charged over. Peng, peng, peng. It used the special ability of its mountains and rivers, and with its charge, the ground was severely compressed. Furthermore, the pieces of stones that were flying in all directions were all crushed into dust. In its field of gravity, how many were there that could maintain their usual battle prowess? As it neared, Ling Han's godly bones cracked loudly. If it was any other shattering void tier cultivator, they would definitely be compressed into a pulp. Even for a mountain river tier cultivator, if they did not use their origin power to defend themselves, they would suffer the same fate. Yet in Ling Han's case, it was merely his bones that gave a few cracks. His physique as tough as godly metal was really too powerful. Ling Han repeated the same trick. He delivered another strike with the 7-kill subduing soul technique, and caused the silver-horned mad rhinoceros to once again enter into a state of confusion, and the gravity around them also went back to normal with that. Shui Yenyu took the opening to strike, and slashed onto the silver-horned mad rhinoceros's wound. With a new wound added onto an old one, the silver-horned mad rhinoceros was finally severely injured. Releasing a cry of agony, it charged madly in all directions, its hooves flying, bulldozing the surrounding ground into a mess. Again, Ling Han and Shui Yenyu worked together endlessly, and after more than 10 times, finally killed this demonic beast. Thankfully, the demonic beasts here did not have much intelligence. If not, after being wounded so many times, it should have fled. With its physique and speed, the chances that it could flee successfully from them were still quite high. Shui Yenyu felt some disbelief. Such a powerful demonic beast actually died under her blade. What kind of secret technique did you use that could actually stun the silver-horned mad rhinoceros? Shui Yenyu asked with surprise. If that had not been the case, how could she have possibly succeeded so easily? Hee. Ling Han merely smiled, but did not want to reveal his trump card. Shui Yenyu could not help but feel annoyed. Still, when she remembered that the two of them were merely pretend lovers, what position was she in to demand Ling Han to tell her about his trump card? If it wasn't for the fact that Ling Han did not want to expose the secret of the Black Tower, he could directly draw the silver-horned mad rhinoceros into the Black Tower after it had lost consciousness. That way, he would be able to easily decide the life and death of this immortal-level demonic beast. Ling Han's abilities were not enough, so Shui Yenyu cut open the body of the silver-horned mad rhinoceros with her sword. After searching a while, she finally pulled out a piece of meat that was only about the size of the pinky finger. Unlike other meat, this piece of meat was completely snow white. Furthermore, it had a sweet scent, and weighed only about 50 grams at most. Spiritual meat. The very most valuable object in a demonic beast. For cultivators, it was extremely nutritious as it could greatly boost their cultivation and replenish their stamina. Shui Yenyu sawed off that silver horn. Even though this demonic beast was huge, the only really valuable objects were the spiritual meat as well as that silver horn. I heard that if the horn of a rhino is ground to powder, consuming it would boost the male sex drive. It can't be that you're planning to make me take it as a tonic, right? Ling Han remarked suddenly. Shui Yenyu instantly went berserk, and began to chase Ling Han around, brandishing her sword with killing intent. After much hassle, he finally calmed her down. The two began to search thoroughly again, but did not find any mountain river stones in the vicinity. So, in the end, what does a mountain river stone look like? Ling Han asked. It glows slightly, and will be recognizable with a single look, Shui Yenyu said. They did not immediately consume the spiritual meat, but kept it instead. Refining spiritual meat would need a lot of time, but they had no idea how long they would be able to stay here. Hence, they naturally had to make as much of the time as possible to find mountain river stones, and try their best to hunt demonic beasts to harvest more spiritual meat. Of course, that piece of godly metal was also one of their targets. If it had been just Ling Han alone, he would definitely have lost his way, with no idea where he was supposed to go, but now that Shui Yenyu was here, she had a map that had been drawn by uncountable generations of people who had entered into the Heavenly Sea mystery realm. It was very detailed. Thus, they did not worry that they would be running around for no reason. With this special weapon of Ling Han's, they swept through all on their way, killing a great many powerful demonic beasts, and also harvesting multiple pieces of spiritual meat, which Shui Yenyu was overjoyed at. She had not thought that their harvest would actually be so bountiful. Unfortunately, they had still not spotted a single mountain river stone. This was very normal. How could the extraordinary stones be so easily found? Of course, they were not invincible. If they encountered a demonic beast in the medium extreme of the mountain river tier, they could only choose to flee. Ling Han's 7-kill subduing soul technique was completely ineffective on them. At most, it could only cause a target of this level a slight piercing pain. After a whole 3 days, a ravine appeared in front of them. This was the path that they had to pass through to get to the Crimson Lake. They chose that place for their next stop as it was definite that there would be mountain river stones there. On both sides, there were extraordinarily steep mountains, which were fraught with danger, and could not possibly be climbed. Hence, they would have to pass through this ravine. However, this ravine was not all that safe. It was only relatively safe in comparison. If one wanted to be truly safe, he should not leave home at all. According to rumors, the most dangerous creature in this ravine is a type of demonic tree. Usually, it pretends to be motionless, but when prey passes by, it will suddenly become hostile. The moment you become entangled in its branches, even a cultivator at the peak of the low extreme would find it very difficult to struggle free, Shui Yenyu explained. The Shui clan is a 5th-tier clan at the very least, so your clan should have prepared something for you, right? Ling Han asked. Shui Yenyu nodded, and said, flame bullets, which possess great destructive effect on that demonic tree. However, there are only 3. Are there any treasures on the demonic tree? Ling Han asked in high spirits. Shui Yenyu rolled her eyes, and said, there has never been anyone that dared to bear any intentions on this ravine. The faster they got through, the better, and you still plan to reap a good harvest here? Can't I? Ling Han felt slightly disappointed. Shui Yenyu shook her head. There isn't any spiritual meat on the demonic tree. At most, its trunk is extremely hard, and could be used to forge a weapon, but it would not be very effective, as it could be overcome by flames, so there is an obvious weakness. Then forget it. Let's just quickly pass through. Ling Han had lost all interest. The pair walked into the ravine. This place was so quiet it was a bit scary. They could not hear any chirping of insects or animal cries. It was like a dead ravine, and the silence would make one shiver in trepidation. There was no obvious path in the ravine, so they walked under the trees. The trees here were not very tall, the tallest being only about 30 meters tall. There was absolutely no way they could compare to the trees outside, which were easily over 3,000 meters tall. Once they walked further, they could see there were even vines covered with sharp black thorns growing beneath these trees. These thorns were extremely sharp. If one did not actively use origin power to defend himself, they could easily penetrate the skin. Furthermore, they were covered with poison, which could practically turn their prey into a pool of blood in an instant to be absorbed as nutrition by the vines. The only thing remaining would be a pile of bones. Advancing further ahead would be difficult as they would need to open up a new path. There was nothing else that could be done. Who asked them to be the first here? The two of them began slicing apart the vines, but did not set them on fire, because it was useless even if they did. Ordinary flames could not possibly damage these vines. It was necessary to have a cultivator that had especially cultivated in a fire element secret technique, and his cultivation level had to reach the mountain river tier at least. This was because this was the immortal realm, and a shattering void tier cultivator would really not be able to cause much of a ripple here, being equivalent to a mortal in the small world. After quite some time, the sound of movement was heard from behind them. They turned to take a look. It looked like someone else had come. Great, more hands mean more effort. If we open the path together, we can increase the speed of our advance, Ling Han said. Careful, it is difficult to guess the hearts of others, Shui Yenyu reminded. Ling Han nodded, and said, if others do not offend me, neither will I offend others. If they bear malicious intent, then I will definitely make them regret that fact. Chapter 947 Wounding an Immortal. Chapter 947 Wounding an Immortal. The two of you were really quite fast. From the opposite side, 3 people walked over. They were all men. 2 of them were very young, but both were in the low extreme of the mountain river tier, whereas the third one was an old man exuding a slightly frightening aura. This mystery realm only placed a limit on cultivation level, and not on age. Hence, whether one could enter or not would have no relation to his or her talent. There were some who were not very talented, and already reached their limit by forcibly advancing into the immortal level. For their whole lives, they would only be capable of stagnating in the low extreme. These people naturally did not have much potential to be nurtured. However, because of the entry restrictions of the Heavenly Sea Mystery Realm, they became useful. They spent their whole lives on this cultivation level, and had also thus cultivated the low extreme to the maximum, so their battle prowess was quite frightening. Even if their talent was far from reaching the extent of 1-star or 2-star geniuses, with the concentration of countless some had even taken some secret medicines as well, they sacrificed the possibility of raising their cultivation level further to attain a greater battle prowess in a battle of the same level. In the first place, they did not have any more room for improvement, so it wasn't much of a loss. They were obviously very ordinary, yet it was possible that they would exhibit battle prowess on the level of 3 or even 4-star geniuses. It was all for the sake of this one time every 10 years, to show their capabilities in this kind of mystery realm. Obviously, this old man was such an example. He was obviously only in the low extreme of mountain river tier, yet the aura he exuded was extremely powerful, far surpassing his actual cultivation level. Shui Yenyu's heart clenched. In the present situation, the opposite side numbered more than theirs. The moment they started fighting, their side would definitely be at a great disadvantage. Thankfully, Ling Han was a secret weapon. Who would have imagined that a mere shattering void tier cultivator would pose a threat to a mountain river tier elite? She asked calmly, "Are the 3 of you not going to join us in opening the path? Our time here is limited. No one wants to go home empty-handed, right?" The trio before them smiled, and drew out their respective weapons to begin opening a new path. "We came from the Lang clan of Eternity Sky. May I ask how I should address you, fairy?" One of the young men looked at Shui Yenyu's alluring figure, his eyes flickering with an odd light. "Chaotic stars majestic." Shio. Shui Yenyu had just opened her mouth when she saw the 3 of them move simultaneously, directing an attack towards her. The 3 of them had obviously long come to an understanding as they moved at almost the same time. In their minds, naturally, only Shui Yenyu was a possible threat to them. They had directly overlooked that brat in the shattering void tier. However, though their attacks were fierce, they avoided Shui Yenyu's vital points. It was obvious that this attack was only meant to subdue her, and not to kill her. This act was not out of kindness, but rather possessed a more malicious intent behind it. Shui Yenyu's beautiful face instantly froze over, and she rebuked, "Despicable." She brandished her sword in a flash, and a cold light flashed over, abruptly freezing the air. The surrounding temperature dropped drastically. She had long since been on her guard. How could she possibly trust a few people that she had never seen before? But it was a battle of 3 versus 1, and the old man was frighteningly powerful, with battle prowess that was almost on the level of a 4-star genius. As he struck out with a saber, golden light shone blindingly as if his blade could split open the heavens and earth itself, causing one to feel a shiver that could not be resisted. "Have the 3 of you forgotten me?" Ling Han asked, smiling, and directly shot out an attack with the 7-kill subduing soul technique. A young man's figure instantly paused as he was stunned. Ling Han took the chance to strike with his sword, and slashed right down on his head. A fountain of blood gushed out, making for a very sad yet beautiful scene. Who would have imagined that a shattering void tier cultivator would possess such a strong ability? The remaining 2 on the opposite side were stunned. Ding, ding. Shui Yenyu's sword swept past, exchanging a blow with them. Peng. Shui Yenyu was sent flying with the impact. That old man was too strong. Even if he was slightly distracted, he could not be stopped. Thankfully, she made use of being sent flying to disperse the power of the blow she took as much as possible. Though her beautiful face was a little pale, she was mostly unharmed. "Ah!" The wounded young man screamed horribly. He had already snapped back to his senses, and the great pain caused him to call out uncontrollably. He felt as if his head was about to fall off his shoulders. An immortal-level cultivator is really difficult to kill, Ling Han exclaimed in his heart. Though his skin had been very easily split open, his bones had been refined to become extremely hard. Though it was still far from the level of godly metal, it was still not something that could be split apart with just one strike from him. What a real pity. Ziwei, what is going on here? The other two asked, their expressions stunned. This was extremely shocking. The other was merely in the shattering void tier, yet was capable of wounding an immortal, and had even nearly killed him. He has learnt a secret technique that attacks my spirit directly, causing me to sink into a state of confusion, the wounded young man told them after a slight period of recollection. A spiritual secret technique, the other two people exclaimed in surprise. At first, they looked stunned, but it was quickly followed by ecstasy. Everyone knew that though immortals focused on cultivating their spirits, the main purpose for strengthening one's spirit was so that their spirits would not be so easily killed. From another aspect, the stronger the spirit, the more they would be able to draw upon the regulations of heaven and earth to boost their own battle prowess. However, the spirit itself actually played no part in direct attack. Yet, there were techniques in this world that could make the spirit itself into a weapon that could attack another, and kill others in a way that could not be detected. This was known as a spiritual secret technique. However, spiritual secret techniques were extremely rare, and they were all held by a few extremely powerful forces. They would definitely not be taught to outsiders. They would not even teach them to the descendants of their daughters most of the time, unless they were really extremely talented. Furthermore, their fathers had to marry into the clan. Now that they had discovered that Ling Han had a spiritual secret technique, how could they not be overjoyed? They would snatch and take it for themselves. Ling Han smiled calmly, and said, "You both look ugly, but you have beautiful dreams. Mph, so what if you possess a spiritual secret technique? I have cultivated my spirit for several dozen thousand years. As long as I defend myself fully, how would you be able to get an opportunity to use your technique?" The old man moved, his long saber striking out, aimed directly at Ling Han's chest. He wanted to kill Ling Han so he could pluck out his memories directly to obtain this secret technique. There was completely no need to leave him alive. Elder Yang, what need is there for you to move against a mere shattering void tier cultivator? Leave it to me. The unwounded young man made his move as well, wanting to be the one to take Ling Han's life. The plucking of another's soul could be done only once. After the soul was plucked, the teacher would naturally be completely useless. But, who would be able to guarantee that the old man would share the technique with others after he had taken it? Hence, he could only really relax when it was he himself that got a hold of the technique. The two of them both used deadly techniques so that each could be the first to kill Ling Han and snatch away his body from each other, then pluck out his soul while his body was still fresh to steal his technique. Shui Yenyu, meanwhile, had absolutely no intention of coming to his rescue. Instead, brandishing her sword, she slashed out at the wounded young man. Though this person had not been killed by a single strike, he had still suffered a severe injury. He was presently circulating his cultivation technique to allow the wound to heal. Otherwise, if his neck was to be completely severed, then he would not even be able to take alchemical pills. Shui Yenyu charged over, and the man could only parry her strikes with a single arm. However, the moment he was engaged in battle, he would have to distribute some part of his origin power, and his broken neck would instantly be pouring out blood like crazy. "Help me! Help me!" he called out quickly. But how could it be that the remaining two would still bother with him? Their eyes were completely focused on Ling Han. The value of a spiritual secret technique was too high. It was even more valuable than a mountain river stone. After all, they could enter this place once every decade, and in the case of the low extreme of mountain river tier, the majority had to remain on this level a few 100,000 years, so there was naturally no need for a rush. Peng! Peng! The two elites of mountain river tier made their moves, which naturally landed solidly on Ling Han. Chapter 948, Powerfully Matching Two Great Elites of Mountain River Tier. Chapter 948, Powerfully Matching Two Great Elites of Mountain River Tier. The old man's saber slashed down onto Ling Han's neck from the left, while the young man's sword stabbed into Ling Han's lower abdomen from the right. Their attacks landed on Ling Han at about the same time. Logically, Ling Han should have been split apart into 3 pieces. These were attacks from Mountain River tier elites, so how could a mere shattering void tier cultivator hope to block them? However, Ling Han's physique was on the level of a monster. As the saber and slash struck simultaneously, it just so happened 2 flows of energy came from completely opposite directions and crashed into him, hence cancelling each other out. Otherwise, whether it was the saber slash or the sword strike that Ling Han took head-on, he would have been immediately sent flying. Ah! The young man released a scream of pain, the web between his thumb and forefinger splitting open. The present Ling Han was a piece of godly metal. Hence, when the 2 of them struck simultaneously on a piece of godly metal, it was equivalent to the both of them exchanging a blow with each other. The old man was probably comparable to a 4-star genius, so his talent was naturally completely superior to the young man's. An attack that met force with force naturally resulted him being on the losing side. Pu. The old man was so stunned his eyeballs were almost popping out of their sockets, his mouth wide open. Ling Han did not even need the 7 kills subduing soul technique, and he was already stunned. Monster. An absolute monster. The simultaneous strikes of 2 great elites of the Mountain River tier did not even manage to harm a hair on his head. On the other hand, one of them even had the web between his thumb and forefinger torn open. Was this a dream? Otherwise, how could something so unbelievable happen? Ling Han gritted his teeth, feeling displeased. He was not a sandbag, so why should he stand there and keep letting others hit him? Without entering into the Mountain River tier, it was impossible. He took the chance to attack, and with the landing of a spiritual attack, the young man abruptly became stunned. That scene earlier had too much of an impact on him, so he had forgotten to guard his divine sense. How dare you? The old man came back to his senses. Raising his blade once more, he slashed out at Ling Han again. His abilities were stronger than Ling Han's by who knew how many times. Though he started later, the saber's blade instantly caught up to Ling Han's back, and his slash landed heavily. Peng! Ling Han was instantly sent flying. His strength was ultimately incomparable to the Mountain River tier, after all. He flew back more than 1,000 meters away before finally stopping. Thankfully, he had not crashed in the direction of the deeper parts of the ravine. Otherwise, he would have possibly been pierced by the vines. However, it was not certain they could do it, either. His physique was too tough, so perhaps even those sharp thorns would have no effect on him. The old man then turned to charge at Shui Yenyu. The other young man was already approaching a state of crisis. After all, Shui Yenyu was a genuine Mountain River tier cultivator. Furthermore, she was a 2-star genius, so how could she be underestimated? Ling Han got back up, and drew out a bow. The annihilating dragon star arrow was circulating, and there were images of suns, moons, and stars flickering in his eyes. A feeling of ice rose up in all 3 members of the Lang clan at the same time, and none of them actually dared make any rash moves. Their instinct told them that if they were not careful, they could possibly die. A shattering void tier cultivator? They all looked at Ling Han, all of them wearing an expression of shock at how unfathomable this was. What kind of archery technique is this? He is obviously just a shattering void tier cultivator, yet he gives off a threatening feeling for me. That arrow must have been forged from godly metal. Only the wounded young man did not let out an exclamation of shock at all. That was because Shui Yenyu had been chasing him down all this time, seeming like she would not rest until she killed him. Ling Han smiled slightly. Mystical powers were inherited from the immortal realm. Though they were all known as mystical powers in the small world, in the immortal realm, there definitely had to be a ranking system for them. However, if one's cultivation level was too low, then he would not be able to release the full might of the mystical power. Hence, the level of the mystical power itself was naturally meaningless. But it was different now. He was just 1 step away from advancing into immortal level, and the might of his mystical powers had also experienced an obvious boost. The annihilating dragon star arrow was the strongest among his mystical powers, and its might was not just a little bit stronger than the rest. After all, it was a secret technique that was passed down from an immortal. Ling Han only pulled the bowstring, but did not shoot, exerting full pressure on the old and young duo. His purpose was very simple, and that was to drag the time out so Shui Yenyu could kill that wounded young man. Injuring all of a man's fingers was not as effective as chopping off one. The other two members of the Lang clan also understood this logic clearly. They exchanged a look before suddenly shooting off into opposite directions, and charged back at Ling Han. Which one were you going to shoot? With your abilities of the Shattering Void tier, you would only be able to shoot one arrow before they could get near enough, and would definitely be incapable of shooting a second one. Ling Han laughed, his figure retreating backwards. His task had been to cause a delay in the first place. However, no matter how fast he retreated, he could not match the speed of two elites in the Mountain River tier, and the two once again struck out with their sword and saber. Haven't you learnt your lesson? Ling Han put away his bow, his hands stretching out to grab at the saber and sword. This, in the eyes of others, would be an action that courted death, but Ling Han's using it was a smart move. He was going to once more manipulate these two members of the Lang clan and let them massacre one another. The old man took the initiative to change his attack. He struck downwards with his saber in a slash, whilst the young man maintained the course of his sword strike. In this way, even if they both struck Ling Han at the same time, they would not be pushed back due to another opposing force. Peng! Ling Han took these two blows head-on, and was instantly sent flying once more. This is really displeasing, he mumbled. In the small world, when had he ever been so pitiful that he was unable to fight back in the slightest when he was being pummeled by others? But the two members of the Lang clan were even more depressed than he was. Were you really in the Shattering Void tier? How could you take a hit better than even them? One had to know that even if they were the ones being on the receiving end of attacks from two elites of the same cultivation level like this, they would have to throw up one or two mouthfuls of blood at the very least, right? Ling Han did not come out completely unscathed, either. After all, the duo's weapons were both forged from level 1 godly metal. After multiple attacks, a few bloody marks finally appeared on his body. Hey, hey, hey! You two are really too cruel. Did you see? I'm injured. Ling Han said deliberately. The two members of the Lang clan were almost mad with fury. This bastard was definitely showing off. Hehe, we did not have any animosity between us initially, so what need is there for a battle to the death? The old man took the initiative to put away his saber, and said smilingly, this is only a misunderstanding. Let us just go our separate ways like this, all right? Misunderstanding your sister. Ling Han gave him the middle finger. A muscle in the old man's cheek twitched. He had also seen that the injured young man was not going to last much longer, and thus thought of first halting the battle and saving him. Then, he would think of a way to deal with this young couple. Ling Han was really too strange. He had to get a hold of his secrets, their value even exceeded the mystery realm itself. He gave a cold humph, and drew his saber once more. He said, do you plan to force us to act? Ret. Ling Han only spat out this word. The old man pondered for a moment, and said, I will block him. You go and assist Ziwei. Yes. The young man did not argue anymore. Ling Han was practically an unkillable monster. He naturally had no intention to become the first to kill Ling Han and pluck out his soul any longer. He immediately charged towards Shui Yenyu, otherwise, it was highly possible his companion would die. Ling Han smirked, and drew out another arrow. Don't even think about it. The old man, brandishing his saber, delivered a slash. 7-kill subduing soul technique. Ling Han delivered a spiritual attack towards the old man. The old man had obviously ensured his divine sense was closely defended, but he still experienced a slight moment of inattention. This bit of time was not enough to allow Ling Han to cause him damage, yet it did allow Ling Han to increase the distance, his arrow already notched. Annihilating Dragon Star Arrow. Chapter 949, A Major Victory. Chapter 949, A Major Victory. Xiao, a black arrow immediately transformed into a flow of light, and shot towards the back of that young man. How could the young man have imagined that Ling Han would still manage to make a move on him even with the old man impeding him? Furthermore, this arrow was really too fast. It had practically reached the standard of the low extreme of the Mountain River tier. Elder Yang, the young man roared in anger. You did it on purpose, didn't you? He surely wanted them to die so he could take that spiritual secret technique for himself. He forcibly turned back around and delivered a sword strike. Yet Ling Han had used two mystical powers in this arrow. The Eye of Truth had long since spotted the place where his defenses were the weakest, and added with the fact that the arrow that had been shot was forged from level 1 godly metal, how sharp would it be? Xiao, the black arrow pierced through the image of his sword strike, and with a pu, shot right into his body. Thanks to the fact that he managed to lean to the side in the nick of time, the arrow just missed the vital point, his heart. This arrow instead pierced into his shoulder, creating a shower of blood. Ah! The young man's expression changed drastically. There are patterns to eliminate immortals on this arrow. Peng, his shoulder suddenly exploded, and he directly lost the other half of his body. The vitality of immortals was too strong. This had not killed him. The young man swayed slightly, and hurriedly drew out a bottle of liquid, pouring it down on his own body. Suddenly, a green-colored light appeared, and his body actually began recovering quickly. Still, his heart ached painfully. This was a divine fluid that his clan had bestowed on him to save his life in a crisis. Not only was it extremely limited, he could only use it once in his entire lifetime. Using it a second time would have no effect. This meant that if he met with any life-threatening danger in the mystery realm again, he would not have another chance to survive. But the divine fluid did quickly take effect. The destroyed half of his body was currently regrowing blood and flesh at an amazing speed. Just at this moment, multiple black shapes shot towards him as if they were sharp arrows. In these circumstances, the young man had only focused on the two great threats posed by Ling Han and Shui Yenyu. How could he have imagined that there would be a third party in this battle? He was completely unguarded, and was instantly tightly wrapped around by those black shapes. Upon another look, these were multiple branches, and they originated from a great tree in the ravine. The demonic tree. The young man screamed out horribly. Those branches stabbed into his wound, and were endlessly absorbing his life energy. The abilities of this demonic tree were extremely frightening in the first place, and even if he had been in his prime condition, he would have to pay a great price to be able to struggle free. Now that he was severely wounded, how could he have any way to resist? His body immediately wilted at a visibly fast pace. That was because his blood and flesh had been sucked out by the demonic tree. The vitality and life energy of a cultivator was inside these substances. Demonic tree, how dare you? The old man from the Lang clan could no longer bother with Ling Han, and hurriedly delivered a slash with his saber. He was really very strong. It did not have any effect on Ling Han, because Ling Han's physique was really too inhuman, but the demonic tree was not Ling Han, and it could not help but loosen its branches and retreat after suffering a few slashes. Its roots were in the depths of the ravine, and it was there that its battle prowess was the strongest. But the young man had received a severe injury in the first place, and leeched by the demonic tree, he had practically become a dried corpse. Even if he was not dead yet, he was not far from it. The old man had just picked the young man up when he heard a horrible cry behind him. He turned around, and only saw that Shui Yenyu pierced straight through the other young man's heart. That was definitely complete death. The old man was both enraged, his whole body trembling with the emotion. This result was definitely not within his expectations. The enemy was obviously only a mountain river tier cultivator and a shattering void tier cultivator, so how was it that the tables had turned, and it was them that had suffered serious damage? His talent was not outstanding. Advancing into the mountain river tier had already expended any potential that he possessed. However, the clan still spared no expense and gave him a great many mountain river stones to refine. Their purpose was to make him into an invincible existence in the low extreme so that he could obtain even more mountain river stones for the clan. In the last 10,000 years, he had indeed done so, and had also been very successful, but this time, his losses were too big. Out of two heirs with boundless prospects from the Lang clan, one was dead, and even if the other was not, he was crippled. How was he going to explain this to the clan? His eyes spewed fire, and he shouted loudly, "You all deserve to die." Ling Han shook his head, and said, "The evils we bring on ourselves are the hardest to bear." The old man tossed the young man onto the ground. The latter was already crippled, and there was no meaning in bringing him back to the clan. The priority now was vengeance. Now that he had nothing to worry about, with his battle prowess of a 4-star genius, even if he could not kill this brat, how could it be that this woman would also be as difficult to kill? Ling Han stood in front of Shui Yenyu with a smile, and said, "See, you still need me to protect you." Shui Yenyu was very speechless, but who asked this guy to be such a monster that he could not be treated like a shattering void tier cultivator at all? She could not help but wonder when Ling Han entered into the mountain river tier, what kind of a monster would he be? "I, too, want to know how strong I'll be when I become a mountain river tier cultivator," Ling Han remarked with a nod of his head. "You know what I am thinking about?" Shui Yenyu asked in surprise. "It's all written on your face." The old man from the Lang clan roared angrily, "Do you two think I am not here?" Brandishing his saber, he charged over. Ling Han laughed, and said, "Come, let us work together just like we did before." Shui Yenyu nodded. Previously, she and Ling Han had worked together to kill a great many demonic beasts whose battle prowess was superior to theirs. Peng, peng, peng. They engaged in a furious battle. The old man from the Lang clan was indeed very mighty. After he had closed the distance so that there was no way to exhibit the full might of the annihilating Dragonstar arrow, Ling Han could only affect him slightly with his 7-kill subduing soul technique, though the effects were not obvious. The old man had been cultivating for several dozen thousand years, so his spirit was very strong, and it was very difficult to influence. Additionally, he focused on attacking Shui Yenyu. With his stronger battle prowess, he battled at close quarters with Shui Yenyu, so even if Ling Han managed to pull out the distance, he would not dare to activate the annihilating Dragonstar arrow, as the possibility of him accidentally hitting Shui Yenyu was extremely high. With the high pressure exerted by the old man, Shui Yenyu immediately looked like she was struggling. Her battle prowess was in the late stage of the low extreme, but the old man was equivalent to being at the peak of the medium extreme. This gap was not just a little small. In the immortal level, no one could afford being inferior by a mere sub-level, what more when the gap between them was more than a minor tier. Merely after over 100 moves, Shui Yenyu was wounded. Now, it was only a light injury, but it would very soon become a severe injury, and would finally lead to her tragic death. If the old man had possessed any extremely filthy thoughts previously, he now only had one intention, and that was to kill Shui Yenyu. At least, he could then take half of his revenge. Ling Han's brow frowned, and he finally came to a decision. He could not bring himself to sit by and watch as Shui Yenyu died in battle. 7-kill subduing soul technique. With the spiritual attack, the old man was briefly stunned. This could only resolve Shui Yenyu's dangerous situation temporarily. If that had not been the case, how could she have been able to block over 100 moves from the old man? Ling Han wrapped his divine sense around the old man, and directly drew him into the Black Tower. Shui Yenyu was just about to slash out with her sword, yet suddenly realized that she had lost her target. She could not help but gape widely in shock, and asked, where has he gone? Could this old man also be capable of instant teleportation? Chapter 950, Not Understanding a Woman's Heart. Chapter 950, Not Understanding a Woman's Heart. Shui Yenyu did not dare to let her guard down in the slightest. An enemy that was capable of instant teleportation was too terrifying. Be careful, she advised Ling Han. Ling Han could not help but smile as he said, Be careful of what? That old man. Shui Yenyu was a little driven mad. Didn't you see that a human being had suddenly disappeared? Oh, him. Ling Han scratched his head, and then spread out his hands in front of him. It should be impossible that he would reappear. You? Shui Yenyu suddenly realized. You drew him into the spatial god tool? You finally realize. Ling Han sighed. Shui Yenyu shook her head, and said, No, a spatial god tool should only be capable of storage. If others were not willing to enter, could you still force them to? With the abilities of that old man, it is impossible that you would be able to force him in. Furthermore, it has already been so long, so no matter what, he should have already fought his way out by now. My spatial god tool is a little different. Even it was a great elite of the heavenly body tier that entered, Whether they stand or kneel would depend on my mood, Ling Han said, smiling. Shui Yenyu looked at Ling Han in astonishment. This was too shocking. It also meant that even if the Empress of the Chaotic Star's majestic empire entered into this spatial god tool, her life or death would be in Ling Han's hands as well. Hiss, had this guy really come from a small world? What is it? Struck dumb by my handsomeness? Ling Han asked with a laugh. Shui Yenyu's eyes turned, and then she said suddenly, we have encountered so many demonic beasts before, you could have actually drawn them into your spatial god tool easily, right? Ling Han hummed. It wasn't a very good thing for a woman to be too clever. Shui Yenyu was instantly angered. There were a good few times that I was almost heavily injured. It is because you did not trust me, so you did not use your spatial god tool. Ling Han laughed, and said, well, I have still trusted you now, haven't I? Otherwise, I could just watch as you get yourself killed by that old man, couldn't I? You are merely twisting the facts. In any case, you just did not trust me. Shui Yenyu was still displeased. Ling Han shrugged with a smile, and said, Senior sister, have you gone too deeply into the act? We are only pretend lovers, but we have not really done anything like handing our hearts to one another. Shui Yenyu's beautiful face turned ashen, and she slashed her sword at the vines in front of her, biting tightly down on her lip. Were his words too heavy? Ling Han wondered. Still, he and this senior sister Shui were indeed merely pretending to be lovers. Aside from that, they did not have any deep relations. When it came to a secret as huge as the spatial god tool, how could he easily reveal it to another person? If it was a decisive and ruthless man like Rain Emperor, he might have already killed Shui Yenyu to ensure this secret remained a secret. Him stepping out to save her was already his heart being soft, but why did it now seem like he was someone who had done something wrong? Women were really baffling. Ling Han first dealt with the corpses of the two young people of the Lang clan, and then headed to help Shui Yenyu slash at the vines. Stay far away from me, Shui Yenyu said, her expression icy. This time, Ling Han did not obey. Instead, he quietly continued to cut away at the vines. Thick-skinned. Shui Yenyu spat, but her expression took a turn for the better. Ling Han breathed a sigh of relief. It looked like the rain was over, and the sky was beginning to clear one. After another while, more people came from behind them. However, this time, they were from the Chaotic Star's majestic empire, and knew Shui Yenyu. All of them worked together, and their progress instantly sped up considerably. From behind them, more and more people came. Now that there were a lot of people, it was hard for fights to start because no one had absolute confidence that they could kill anyone else. If they rashly started a fight, it might possibly result in neither side winning, and both sides coming off worse. Moreover, everyone had come here for the mountain river stones. If they wanted a fight, they could get on the battlefield. There had never been an end to the minor scuffles between the three great majestic empires. When the numbers reached over 100, it became an indestructible force. They swept aside all obstacles in their way, and even the demonic tree could only uproot its roots and flee, not daring to chance a battle. From this aspect, the tree that lacked a brain was, on the contrary, smarter than demonic beasts, which would make others click their tongues in amazement. After leaving the ravine, this temporary alliance was immediately disbanded. Everyone used their motion techniques and went their own way. No one had a feeling of camaraderie brought about by battling side by side. To form a group with people who had no relation to them was too dangerous. Putting aside complete strangers, they might not be able to really trust even the people that had originated from the same clan. In truth, Ling Han and Shui Yenyu were quite unique. They were obviously pretend lovers, yet had traveled together for such a long way, and a kind of mutual understanding had developed between them. Since he had already made known a little of the abilities of the Black Tower to Shui Yenyu, Ling Han did not hide this card any further on the rest of their way. When they encountered demonic beasts in the mountain river tier, he would directly act. He would first strike them unconscious, and then draw them into the Black Toe as easy as a pie. But this was only limited to the low extreme. If they encountered those in the medium extreme, even Ling Han could do nothing, and they would have to retreat in defeat. Even so, their harvest was still amazing. In a short 2 days, They had killed or captured over 100 demonic beasts, which was something that made Shui Yenyu feel like she couldn't believe her own eyes. Putting aside mountain river stones, the spiritual meat was already extremely valuable. And they finally obtained a mountain river stone as well. It was a stone completely dark green in color. It looked slightly translucent, and holding it in one's hand would give them a refreshing feeling. It was indeed extraordinary, and could be recognized with a single look. Shui Yenyu tossed the mountain river stone over to Ling Han, and said, "Hurry up and refine it. Once you form your mountains and rivers, you will truly possess the ability to move around in this place." Ling Han nodded. He did not need to advance very far in the mountain river tier. The most important thing now was to form his mountains and rivers, and become a cultivator of the immortal level. Unfortunately, this mountain river stone did not possess any special trait. "Halt!" A shout rang out from ahead of them, and they saw two groups of people race out from the side. The group in front was a group of 3, and the group behind was a group of 7. Obviously, one group was in flight, whilst the other group was chasing them down. "Leave the mountain river stone, and we can spare your lives," the group of 7 called out. The group of 3 in front turned a deaf ear. This was really a joke. They were here for the mountain river stone, so they would naturally not compromise so easily. They gritted their teeth, and one of them drew out a pair of wings, which he then pressed down on his back. Hong, 2 giant 9-meter-long wings actually spread out from his back. The other 2 grabbed hold of his thighs, and as the giant wings flapped, they instantly flew into the sky. In the immortal realm, even mountain river tier cultivators did not possess the ability of flight unless they were of a specific race that possessed wings. Otherwise, they could only make use of flight god tools. When the 7 behind them saw this, they all stopped weakly. This naturally exceeded the bounds of their control. In truth, the 3 people in front had initially not planned to use this treasure. It was completely because they had spotted Ling Han and Shui Yenyu, and were thus afraid that they would be trapped in a pincer attack from the front and back. Hence, enduring much heartache, they used this treasured item. This was something that had a limited number of uses, so it was indeed a heartache. When the eyes of the group of 7 swept over Ling Han and Shui Yenyu, they all smirked coldly. "So the mountain river stone is with the 2 of you, hand it over. It's something that we've only managed to obtain after much painstaking effort, and was then stolen by the 3 people just now. The 2 of you had better hand the item over. This is not something that belongs to you," the group of 7 called out. Shui Yenyu and Ling Han exchanged a glance, and their only thought was that this group of 7 was really quite shameless. Weren't they simply spewing lies right in front of them? Chapter 951, Separate. Chapter 951, Separate. Ling Han chuckled, and asked, "What if we don't?" He had completely no intention of arguing whom the mountain river stone belonged to exactly. This was completely obvious. The other side simply wanted to take theirs. "You're not going to hand it over?" The 7 smirked coldly. Was there need to deliberate on that issue further? "This woman is really quite pretty. If we kill her, it's a real pity. Hehe, then we'll have our fun first before we kill her. It's too bad we couldn't possibly bring her out of the mystery realm. Otherwise, it would have been a real pity to kill her." They stared at Shui Yenyu, completely making no effort to hide the lust in their eyes. In their eyes, it was a fight of 7 elites of mountain river tier against a single mountain river tier and a shattering void tier cultivator, so they were naturally certain of victory, and had no doubt about it. Though the group of 3 managed to escape, wasn't there still another mountain river stone here? There was also a captivating beauty. This meant they profited. The more they looked at Shui Yenyu, the more their hearts fluttered. They became impatient, wanting nothing more than to leap over and snatch her away. "Hey, hey, hey! Swallow down your saliva, she is my wife." Though only temporarily, Ling Han said with a smile, leaping out, and taking the initiative to strike. "You are courting death." One of them laughed coldly, and casually struck out a palm strike at Ling Han. Meanwhile, the other 6 paid absolutely no attention to them. In their eyes, this was naturally a matter of an instant kill. They were focused on Shui Yenyu. The more they looked at this captivating beauty, the more their hearts fluttered. 7 kill subduing soul technique, draw in. Ling Han was more and more accustomed to using these two moves, and in an instant, the battle was decided. The remaining 6 looked astonished at this. Right in front of their eyes, their companion had actually disappeared into thin air in an incredibly bizarre manner. Were they seeing things? What kind of trick did you use? Where did he go? They exclaimed in harsh voices. Is there any need to ask? Ling Han smirked coldly. Daring to have thoughts about my wife, the natural consequence is to be killed without pardon. Shui Yenyu's beautiful face flushed, but she realized that she seemed to have less and less resistance towards the address wife as she was actually not as angry as she used to be. Kill. The 6 made their move at the same time. Though the moves Ling Han showed were very bizarre, they believed more in their own abilities. How could it be that 6 mountain river tier cultivators were still insufficient to deal with a shattering void tier cultivator? Peng, peng, peng. Ling Han was instantly hit. He naturally was not a match for a mountain river tier opponent, and was sent flying with the barrage of blows. But when he landed back on the ground, he was actually completely unharmed. The 6 of them gaped in shock. No matter what, they could not accept this reality. Ling Han moved his muscles and bones, and said, "Not bad, not bad. Though the impact is still not that great, there is at least some feeling." The 6 people were almost driven mad by their fury. Did he think they were giving him a massage? But how could this man's defenses possibly be so tough? It had practically reached a frightening extent. Ling Han countered, and delivered another strike with the 7 kill subduing soul technique. However, this time, a flash of lightning actually passed on the forehead of his target, which blocked his spiritual attack. A spiritual secret technique. The man's eyes immediately lit up. I get it now. Just now, you used your spiritual secret technique to confuse his senses, and caused him to disappear with some kind of method. Haha, you didn't know that I have cultivated a secret technique so that my spirit is incredibly firm? Could it be a spatial god tool? Another man questioned. That's right. It must be a spatial god tool. Otherwise, it would be impossible that a real live human being disappeared without a trace. None of the 6 were idiots. With one word here and another there, they had pieced the truth together. Their eyes became heated. According to legends, spatial god tools could only be forged by ultimate elites of the Genesis tier because the inside of the god tool could accommodate living beings. It could be claimed to be a world of its own, so, naturally, only ultimate elites of Genesis tier had the ability to do so. The value of this was who knew how many times higher than a mountain river stones. Furthermore, there was still a spiritual secret technique. Fuck, this brat was a real piece of treasure. The eyes of the 6 burned, and the eyes they looked at Ling Han with were even more heated than when they were looking at Shui Yenyu. Hey, hey, hey. I don't swing that way, so you don't have to look at me with those eyes. Don't you all just happen to be 6 in total? You make 3 pairs just nicely. I, on the other hand, will not accompany you, Ling Han said, smiling. Everyone, guard your divine sense. This brat knows how to deliver spiritual attacks, so don't give him any chance. Yes. The 6 nodded as they began a new barrage of strikes at Ling Han. Ling Han did not have an opportunity to launch consecutive attacks with his 7 kill subduing soul technique. With the barrage of blows from 6 great elites of the mountain river tier, he danced madly like a scarecrow. The only good news was that his physique was really too strong, and so their attacks dealt him completely no damage. Shui Yenyu approached to help, but with her abilities, she could only somewhat impede 2 of them, and there were still 4 left to rain blows down on Ling Han. Finally, Ling Han got the chance to use the 7 kill subduing soul technique, but before he managed to draw that person into the Black Tower, he was sent flying by the other 3, which caused him to miss the chance for an instant kill. The battle was in a stalemate. Overall, Ling Han and Shui Yenyu were at the disadvantage, especially in Shui Yenyu's case. She did not have as tough a physique as Ling Han, and with the combined attacks from 2 equally strong foes, she was in a crisis. Go. Seeing the chance brought by being sent flying, Ling Han landed beside Shui Yenyu, and said in a low voice, I will impede them, and we will reunite at the Crimson Lake. Shui Yenyu hesitated slightly, and then agreed. All right. Ling Han possessed an invincible body. She, on the other hand, would only drag Ling Han down. Thus, she acted decisively here, not being unreasonable and not saying anything more unnecessary. She immediately leaped and ran towards the side. "Don't even think of running," the two people who were responsible for tying down Shui Yenyu shouted immediately, but after they suffered two subsequent spiritual attacks from Ling Han, their figures abruptly paused. Meanwhile, the other four also caught up, which gave Ling Han no further chance to make a move. Ling Han laughed loudly and declared, "Come, I will play with you all. Shahao, Dong Ming, the two of you go and chase that woman." Two of the group of 6 split out to chase Shui Yenyu, but Ling Han summoned the annihilating Dragon Star arrow and stopped the two from going further, firing 2 consecutive shots. In that one instant, Shui Yenyu had run so far that all that was left of her was a small black spot in the distance. All of them were in the low extreme of the mountain river tier, so they would definitely be incapable of catching up with her now. The 6 of them were all furious, and surrounded Ling Han, all of them filled with burning killing intent. "You want to be a hero to save the damsel in distress. How touching. However, how are you going to protect yourself now? Your physique is indeed tough, but we have all the time in the world. We can slowly refine you after we subdue you. You have to know that even the highest grade godly metal could be forged into weapons, so who do you think you are? We will refine you to death, then pluck out your memories and get everything." The 6 spoke out one after another. One of their prey escaping was extremely displeasing to them, but Shui Yenyu was thankfully merely an appetizer, whereas Ling Han was the real treasure trove. Ling Han smiled faintly, and said, "Then you had better find me first." Great shift of yin and yang. Xiao, he disappeared. The 6 of them were gaping in shock before going crazy. Where is he? Even if he has escaped into his spatial god tool, where is the spatial god tool? Could it really be that whatever great shift of yin and yang? Chapter 952 Advancing into Mountain River Tier. Chapter 952 Advancing into Mountain River Tier. Ling Han entered into the Black Tower and sat down with crossed legs. Then, he gripped the mountain river stone in his hand. After entering this place, he, an invincible existence in the shattering void tier, could only depend on the 7-kill subduing soul technique and the Black Tower to spring traps on others, and no longer possessed the image of invincibility. This made him extremely displeased. Now, he was filled with an incredible thirst for power. He would first advance into the mountain river tier, then go out and thrash that bunch. Advancing from shattering void tier to mountain river tier was a qualitative change, a true metamorphosis from mortal to immortal. Without talking about anything else, even shattering void tier would only have a lifespan of slightly more than 1,000 years, but what about immortals? A cultivator of the low extreme of the mountain river tier would have a lifespan as long as 100,000 years, and every next advance of a minor level would increase his lifespan by another 100,000 years. And after advancing into the sun-moon tier, his lifespan would be counted in millions of years. Hence, whether it was the advance of a minor level or a major cultivation tier, it was a massive transformation. Without entering into immortal level, he would only be an ant in the end. Ordinarily speaking, taking this step would need several months, years, or even more than a century, but with a mountain river stone now in his possession, it was extremely simple. After refining it, he would advance into the mountain river tier. However, there was a limit to this kind of mountain river tier. He would not be able to advance past the low extreme, and still required his personal comprehension of the cultivation level. One hand holding onto the mountain river stone, Ling Han began refining. Wang, an unknown energy surged out of the mountain river stone, and directly took effect inside his dantian, stimulating an amazing change inside his body. His spiritual ocean was drying up, his spiritual pedestal was deteriorating, and the inside of his dantian had very quickly become a mass of ruins. To bring new life amongst destruction. This realization suddenly arose in Ling Han's heart. From mortal to immortal was a qualitative change, hence, he needed to cast away his old body. The great ocean ebbed completely, leaving behind a wasteland, and in this wasteland, a sliver of life slowly came to be. Hong, long, long. The ground was trembling, and some kind of change was brewing beneath it. The more essence of the mountain river stone Ling Han drew on, the more obvious this change was. Finally, when he had completely refined this mountain river stone, the ground split apart as if a terrible earthquake was occurring. Then, from beneath the ground, a huge a small sharp peak emerged. Hong, Ling Han only felt his whole body shake. This small sharp peak was exuding a powerful energy, which was remolding his body. This was the mountain of mountain river tier? A muscle in Ling Han's cheek twitched slightly. This was a bit too small, wasn't it? However, he had only refined a single mountain river stone. How could he possibly manage to reach the middle stage or the middle stage of the low extreme in an instant? I am already in the mountain river tier now? Ling Han stood up, yet abruptly felt an intense hunger within him. This was not his stomach being hungry, but rather his body, which was filled with hunger for more power. He hurriedly grabbed a large pile of spiritual herbs, and began eating like crazy as he continued to purify even more of the spiritual herbs with the heaven transformation bowl. Then, he poured it into his mouth to fulfill the demands of his body. From mortal to immortal, how humongous this step was. Ling Han could finally understand. After all, if he were to swallow these spiritual herbs a day before, he would burst from being overnourished even if there was only a 10,000th of the amount. But now, he only felt a terrible hunger as if he were about to starve to death. Once about half of the spiritual herbs planted in the Black Tower had been consumed by him, this feeling of hunger finally disappeared. Instead, there was an indescribable feeling of power replacing it. It was really too strong, at least a few hundred times the power of 20 stars of shattering void tier. Xiao, small tower appeared. It was moving lightly, and said, "To advance in this manner is not beneficial to your cultivation." "I know." Ling Han nodded. "However, I am now in a rush to give someone a thrashing, so we can only do this. When I go back, I will cultivate once more from the beginning." Small tower nodded, and continued, "However, you still have advanced into the mountain river tier, so the 4th floor of the Black Tower can be opened now. The floor of fire." Ling Han was pleasantly surprised. "That's right. You can use divine flame in the Black Tower to temper your spirit and physique to a whole new level," Small Tower said. "Can't I use it outside?" Ling Han's brow wrinkled in a frown. "For the moment, no." Small Tower swayed from left to right. This meant a shake of the head. "As long as the tower is not mended, you will only be able to use a portion of the might of the Black Tower, and this is a very small portion. Now, you can go and pass the heavenly tribulation," Small Tower continued. The Black Tower was very amazing as it could even block the tribulation. This was really an absolutely independent space of its own. Ling Han nodded, and flashed out of the Black Tower. Abruptly, he could see the red clouds disperse, and black clouds came rolling out in waves. The brilliant white light of lightning was flickering in the sky. The heavenly tribulation was coming. Ling Han was unafraid. He would make use of the power of the tribulation to temper his godly bones, and improve his physique so it would reach the level of level 2 godly metal. Yi. In the vicinity, a young man appeared. At first, he looked surprised, but then he immediately released a large shout to summon his companions. He was a member of the group of 7 from before. They had not managed to find Ling Han, yet were not satisfied to miss out on this fateful opportunity. Hence, they had left one of their group to stand guard nearby, wanting to know whether Ling Han would suddenly reappear or not. They had really managed to anticipate that moment. The man was slightly surprised. Ling Han actually managed to refine the mountain river stone in the short time of a single day and complete the breakthrough. However, he was just a mountain river tier cultivator that had just broken through, so how much battle prowess could he actually possess? He did not make a move. If he dared to disturb the tribulation of another, he would incur the ire of the heavens and earth, and end up pulled in to experience the tribulation together. This was definitely not good news. Moreover, what need was there for him to be in a rush? After passing the tribulation, Ling Han would definitely be severely injured. This was him speaking from experience. Thus, he was in even less of a rush to make his move. Xiao, Xiao, Xiao. Very quickly, his 5 companions leaped over in quick succession as well. When they saw Ling Han was about to pass a heavenly tribulation, they could not help but smirk coldly. You hid yourself, so we couldn't find you, but now, you were actually stupid enough to undergo a tribulation here? That really was courting your own death. Hong, a bolt of lightning was already descending from the sky. Ling Han stood proudly. The thing he feared the least was the tribulation. His physique had already crossed over into the mountain river tier in advance, and the might of the tribulation would definitely only be in the early stage of the low extreme. Otherwise, how many people would be able to survive? Quong, quong, quong. Bolts of lightning descended one after another. Ling Han basked in the divine lightning, and took the initiative to let it disintegrate his physique to temper it with the divine lightning. The divine lightning could not harm him, but it was a different case if he were to take the initiative to disintegrate his own physique. His godly bones were broken by force, transforming into uncountable pieces. Experiencing the barrage by the lightning, they were improving and advancing further. In the future, every time he increased his cultivation level, there would be another experience like this. Or so Ling Han thought. This was absolutely a cruel torture. That's right. Every time you advance a minor level, you'll have to experience a tribulation and another tempering of your physique, Small Tower responded. Only with that would your physique be refined and polished to perfection, becoming indestructible and invincible. At the same time, every experience of tempering is also a polishing of your spirit. Couldn't we get some divine pills that could allow one to instantly advance into the Genesis tier? Ling Han said mockingly. Where would be the fun in that? Small Tower countered. There is indeed none, Ling Han replied, smiling. His eyes were bright. He was beginning to structure his godly physique. Chapter 953, Trying Out New Moves. Chapter 953, Trying Out New Moves. Ling Han circulated the indestructible Heaven's Scroll, and reformed his godly bones. Destruction followed by construction was a tempering and a qualitative boost. However, this process was really not an enjoyable experience. Ling Han obviously possessed the indestructible true fluid, but he could not use it now, because he needed to allow his godly bones be tempered by the heavenly tribulation to wash away the impurities within. Only with that could his physique advance towards the level of level 2 godly metal. This caused him so much pain that he wanted to die. Temporarily existing without one's body was only possible when one had reached a cultivation level as high as his and had a strong spirit. Otherwise, if it had been an ordinary human being, the body being shattered would have naturally led to definite death. Oh no, this brat failed to pass the tribulation and died, the 6 people on the sidelines all exclaimed, their expressions filled with disappointment. It was naturally impossible that they were sad about Ling Han's death, but if this brat had died, they would not be able to pluck out his soul and obtain the profound secret techniques on Ling Han. But with the raging of the tribulation now, who would dare make a move on Ling Han? Causing a disturbance when another was passing the tribulation, they would be treated the same by the said tribulation. That's not right. If this brat was dead, why has the tribulation not dispersed yet? Someone immediately called out. That's right. If the person was dead, the tribulation would immediately disappear, so why is it still continuing now? This brat is not dead yet. Hehe, it's best if he's not dead. Now, this brat has such heavy injuries, with his physique completely disintegrated by the tribulation, so it would be a piece of cake for us to kill him later. They immediately became excited again. They had an incredible trust in the tribulation because it was a threat that any great elite was incomparably afraid of. Even the ultimate elites of the Genesis tier did not dare clap their chests with confidence and claim that they were absolutely certain of passing a tribulation safely. Who would not lose half their life every time they passed a tribulation? After 4 hours, Ling Han's godly bones finally completed a qualitative change. He circulated the indestructible Heaven's Scroll to allow his godly bones to heal. Now, these godly bones were on par with level 2 godly metal, and had been boosted up another level in terms of quality. After the reforging of his skeleton, flesh and blood immediately regrew, and he was quickly recovering. He had a bit of spare attention, so he took the initiative to absorb the power of lightning, and began once more to temper his body of lightning. But, this time, he discovered that his ability to absorb the power of lightning was limited. It was not that his physique was inadequate, but rather that the thunderclap ninth heaven seemed not to be as strong as he desired in transforming the power of lightning. It was a mystical power, but in the immortal realm, it was perhaps a very common technique. It already appeared to be less strong than he desired when he had just entered into the immortal level. Ling Han could not help but shake his head. Upon further thought, the three styles of black origin originated from the Heaven's Sword Palace, and the strongest character in the Heaven's Sword Palace was only in the Sun-Moon tier, so the might of this sword technique would very soon touch the highest bottleneck it could reach, and it would no longer be possible to improve it further. With a technique that he had not created himself, he would always encounter this kind of awkward situation. In this aspect, he could not help but admire the Rain Emperor, who had invented his own Son of Heaven fist technique. As long as his cultivation level increased, he would naturally boost the might of his self-invented fist technique, and endlessly become stronger. Of course, this process was definitely not simple. Golden characters flipped and turned in Ling Han's mind. Some became words, whilst others took the form of pictures. Annihilating Dragon Star Arrow. No, this was not the Annihilating Dragon Star Arrow that he had learnt, but rather a new archery technique. This was the real Annihilating Dragon Star Arrow. One arrow would annihilate a dragon, and one arrow could shatter a galaxy. Only after stepping into the immortal level would he attain the qualification to learn this archery technique. There was only one move because this was not a fixed move, but rather a method to convert power, instilling the full power in one's body into the arrow, which would kill any god or Buddha that deigned to block its path. It did not appear before, because Ling Han had not stepped into immortal level at all. Ling Han revealed a smile. The heavenly tribulation was dispersing. He would soon become a real immortal. Forming the mountains and rivers was only a sign of the mountain river tier. Whether it was successful or otherwise would still have to depend on whether he could pass the tribulation. When the last bolt of lightning fell, the black clouds in the sky also began to quickly disperse, returning to the mass of red they had once been. Shoo, shoo, shoo. The 6 men on the sidelines immediately leaped over, surrounding him closely. You are quite bold, daring to refine our mountain river stone. However, you have suffered heavy injuries passing the tribulation. Though you have forcefully facilitated your recovery by taking spiritual herbs, there must have been extremely serious problems left behind. Quickly surrender, and we can grant you a quick death. The group of 6 sneered coldly, their expressions arrogant. Although they were all in the low extreme of the mountain river tier, 2 of them had reached the peak of the low extreme, while 3 were in the late stage and 1 was in the middle stage. Furthermore, the 2 that had reached the peak were 1-star geniuses, so their battle prowess was comparable to the early stage of the medium extreme. Wouldn't it be very easy for them to deal with a rookie that had just broken through to the mountain river tier? Ling Han cracked a smile, and said, I am really expectant. After being a human punching bag for so long, it's finally my turn to fight back. Come, the 6 of you, do you plan on attacking one by one, or will you attack together? Such an arrogant tone. You think you have reached the heavens with a single step just by entering into immortal level? Shahao, you go deal with him. All right. One young man moved, and very casually pressed down on Ling Han. The image of a huge mountain and river appeared in midair behind him. There were divine patterns glowing on the mountain as well as on the river. He was in the late stage of the low extreme, so his river was clearly much smaller. The appearance of the mountain river meant that though his attack looked casual, he was actually serious. Otherwise, he could completely conceal his mountain river, just like how it was when he had not made his move. It was obvious that though he possessed a disdainful attitude towards Ling Han, in his heart, he dared not be careless. After all, they were all in the low extreme, so he would naturally not dare be too careless. Ling Han did not have much of an idea of his own power, so he similarly dared not be careless. With a thought, his mountain river took form. Pu. The remaining 5 instantly choked with laughter. This mountain river was really fucking small. They had looked too highly on him. Though the mountain river would become larger with the increase of cultivation level, with such a low starting point, he definitely did not have much future prospects. Even that Shi Hao who had made his move showed a hint of a smile. He had really been too cautious. His opponent had just broken through, so how much might of the mountain river tier would he actually be capable of showing? Peng! The two fighters' hands finally came into contact. After a momentary pause, Shi Hao's hand actually formed a wave as if it was made of noodles. Pa! A broken bone directly pierced out of his shoulder. The bone shone brightly, covered with bits of blood, yet it was like they were agate, forming beads, but merely gathered and did not fall. All of a sudden, the surroundings were frighteningly silent. Had their sight blurred? The remaining 5 tried their utmost to blink. It should have been Shi Hao who had broken Ling Han's bones with a single punch, right? But no matter how hard they blinked their eyes, the scene in front of their eyes did not change in the slightest. They inhaled sharply, and an expression of astonishment appeared on their faces. How much strength would that require? What kind of physique would Ling Han have to be able to break the bone in Shi Hao's arm with a single punch? Shi Hao was also dumbstruck. Only now did he feel the agonizing pain, and he could not help but release a terrible scream. He took a few successive steps back, revealing an expression of extreme terror. This force is definitely not something that a cultivator in the low extreme could possess, early stage of the medium extreme, or perhaps even more than that. Chapter 954, 5-Star Genius. Chapter 954, 5-Star Genius. The expressions of the 6 people were all very serious. Power that reached the medium extreme and battle prowess that reached the medium extreme were 2 completely different concepts. Take, for example, the 2 individuals in the group of 6 who were at the peak stage of the low extreme Yu Li Hui and Wu Fu. They were both 1-star geniuses, and their battle prowess was already comparable to ordinary cultivators at the early stage of the medium extreme. However, in terms of power alone, they were still at the peak stage of the low extreme. Power was only one part of battle prowess. However, it was also the most important part. If Ling Han's power alone had already reached the early stage of the medium extreme, then what level could his peak battle prowess reach? It was only normal that the group of 6 was scared. That person had only just entered the mountain river tier. 4-star genius? Or perhaps even a 5-star genius? A satisfied smile spread across Ling Han's face. His strength sure did live up to the fact that he had only leveled up after cultivating his strength to 20 stars of shattering void tier. Right now, just his power alone had already reached the stage of a 4-star genius. So, what would it reach if he took his Eye of Truth, 3 styles of black origin, and other mystical powers into consideration as well? Come. Let's fight to our heart's content. He appeared extremely enthusiastic, and he couldn't wait to test out his strength. You think we're scared of you? The group of 6 roared. Even the wounded Shi Hao hurriedly swallowed a few pills to forcefully set his broken bones back into place. Then, he used his origin power to hold it in place. With such treatment, he would be able to fight at full strength for a short period of time. However, these 6 people were certainly not brave or honorable individuals, and they all drew out their weapons. Some wielded swords, and some wielded sabers. Their formation appeared very neat. Ling Han laughed loudly as he took the initiative to launch an attack. His physique was on par with level 2 godly metal, so whom in this mystery realm would he need to fear? Peng. Ling Han was like a lion tearing into a pack of wolves, and the 6 people were too afraid to even face him head-on. They all skirted to Ling Han's side before launching attacks toward him. As the swords and sabers flashed about, one of them suddenly started to pulsate with a divine pattern. It wasn't as simple as the weapon being forged from godly metal. It had been imprinted with a divine pattern, meaning that it possessed an additional power. It was a god tool. This was the first time Ling Han had seen a god tool in the immortal realm. He couldn't help but find it fresh and interesting. The additional power that this god tool possessed was flames. A wave of flames would occasionally sweep out from the tip of the sword blade. They were extremely thin, yet they were incredibly powerful. After purposefully allowing a wave of flames to hit him, smoke wafted from Ling Han's hand. He also felt a hint of scorching heat. However, It was merely a little hot. Perhaps these flames wouldn't even be able to wound his previous physique, which was only on par with level 1 godly metal. That being so, how could it wound the current him? But what if the level of this god tool was slightly higher? Ling Han nodded imperceptibly. Even though he possessed a powerful physique, he still couldn't be too careless. After all, his current cultivation level was still too low. He retrieved his heaven transformation bowl to test whether he could snatch this god tool. Wang. Streaks of divine patterns lit up on the heaven transformation bowl as it rose into the sky and faced off against that god tool. They were an even match. Ling Han involuntarily sighed. By the looks of it, the grade of the heaven transformation bowl was only SOSO. As it couldn't snatch that god tool, it was evident that its grade was merely that of a level 1 god tool. In fact, this made a lot of sense. If its grade had been too high, how could he have activated it? In the small world, Ling Han's wealth was quite enormous. The heaven transformation bowl, the vial of curses, which of these wouldn't incite envy and jealousy if they were shown to others? However, looking at them now, they were merely level 1 god tools, the lowest grade tools in the immortal realm. Ling Han unleashed his 3 styles of black origin, thunderclap 9th heaven, and other secret techniques as he analyzed his own battle prowess. If he didn't use any martial arts techniques and relied on his power alone, then his battle prowess could reach a 4-star level. When he activated any one of his secret techniques, however, his battle prowess still remained at a 4-star level. His battle prowess couldn't rise to the 5th-star level. Only when he activated several of his mystical powers together could his battle prowess finally surge up to a 5th-star level. From this, it could be seen just how difficult it was to punch above one's weight in the immortal level. At the same time, Ling Han rejoiced that he had persisted in raising his power to the level of 20 stars of shattering void tier. Otherwise, his battle prowess right now would only be able to reach a maximum of 4 stars. However, I still haven't tested the ultimate arrow of the annihilating dragon star arrow yet, Ling Han thought to himself. He wasn't planning on testing it, either. This arrow would drain all the power in his body, and it would most likely take him a very long time to recover after launching such a strike. Moreover, the strength of these 6 people was far too weak. As such, he wouldn't be able to determine the limit of the annihilating dragon star arrow anyway. Then let me test the vial of curses again. Ling Han wounded each of the 6 people and collected their blood into the vial of curses. In the end, 1 person was killed, and 2 had their hands and feet rot away. The remaining 3 were merely rendered dizzy. Sure enough, the vial of curses was also a low-grade god tool. Enough with this waste of time. Ling Han raised his battle prowess, and quickly disposed of the 2 people whose hands and feet had been rotted away by his vial of curses. Then, he swung his sword and slashed a 3rd person to death. With that done, there were only 2 opponents remaining, both at the peak stage of the low extreme. The 2 people exchanged a glance, and each could see a look of sheer terror on the other's face. They immediately turned around to flee, both speeding off in a different direction. Ha! Ling Han cast a 7-kill subduing soul technique, and the expression of the person on the left instantly froze. Once Ling Han caught up, he slammed his earth-overturning seal into his opponent's head, instantly extinguishing his mind. However, in that instant, the person on the right had already fled over 300 meters. Ling Han drew a bow and activated his annihilating dragon star arrow. Whoosh! An arrow shot out. He didn't use the ultimate arrow. However, this arrow was still tremendously terrifying, and the fleeing person simply didn't have the courage to turn back and resist. How could he evade such attacks if all he knew to do was run? Pu. The arrow penetrated his body and pierced through his heart. That person dazedly turned around, and it looked as if he wanted to say something. Peng. However, his entire chest exploded violently. It was a swift death. Impressive. Ling Han walked over to retrieve his arrow. He had obtained this arrow from the assassin of the Dark Knight Hall. In the beginning, he hadn't realized that the shaft of the arrow was imbued with divine patterns, which raised the lethality of the arrow immensely. Fortunately, his physique was suitably strong. Otherwise, if he had been run through by this arrow at that time, he wouldn't have the chance to be standing here right now. This is an important lesson, Ling Han mumbled to himself. I can't become careless just because I think my physique is powerful. Otherwise, I'll only be digging my own grave. After cleaning the spatial spirit tools of the 6 people, he discovered a few hundred true origin stones. This was a small mound of wealth. What delighted him further was that there were also 3 pieces of spiritual meat as well as 2 mountain river stones. No wonder so many people like to kill and loot. Indeed, it's a great way to rapidly accumulate wealth. However, just as you're able to kill others, others are also able to kill you. This is an endless cycle of grief and destruction. I won't seek to actively kill and loot others. However, if anyone is blind enough to target me, hair. Also, that divine sword suited Ling Han quite nicely. However, he didn't dare use it here, or he would be announcing to the world that it was he who had killed the group of 7. Although it was common knowledge that battle and slaughter was inevitable in this mystery realm, it was still a bad idea to be too showy. I'll test it out when I get back. Ling Han carefully determined his direction. There was no sun or moon here, and north, south, east, and west were all relative. These directions had been artificially decided after countless years of exploration. He had already memorized Shui Yenyu's map a while back. Thus, after analyzing the terrain for a while, he started walking in the direction of the Crimson Lake. Woo-woo, after a short while, the sound of eerie sobbing traveled over from the dense woods to his side. It sounded like the sobbing of a ghost. Chapter 955, What Ghost? Chapter 955, What Ghost? Ling Han's heart suddenly jolted. All kinds of weird and bizarre monstrosities could appear in the mystery realm. Perhaps, it was nothing unusual for a ghost to appear. However, curiosity killed the cat. He was brave and extremely curious, and thus he couldn't help but creep toward that stretch of woods. He trod nimbly, and even drew his divine sword. His movements were especially careful. After arriving at the edge of the woods, he lightly swept aside the tall grass. A sobbing white-robed person appeared in his view. The terrifying thing was, she actually didn't have a head. It's really a ghost. Ling Han clenched the sword in his hand as a numb feeling spread across his body. This wasn't a feeling of fear. Rather, it was one of excitement. He had never killed a ghost before. Shio. He leaped forward, and his sword flashed down. Her. The white-robed figure suddenly raised her head. Who said she didn't have a head? It was just that her head was buried too far down just then. Moreover, her arms had also been wrapped behind her neck, so he had only been able to see the white-colored cloth of her robes. As a result, Ling Han had mistaken her for being headless. Hu Feiyun, the 9th king. The face of this young female was covered in tears, and her expression was also one of daze. Only when the reflection of the sword flashed in her eyes did her dainty mouth suddenly become slack. A stunned expression spread across her face, yet she didn't even attempt to instinctively block or evade. It was already too late for Ling Han to stop his strike, so he instead decided to push forward and send the tip of his sword scraping past the left side of Hu Feiyun's face. A light breeze blew over, causing Hu Feiyun's robes to dance in the air. Pu, 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 pu. After the sword ray slashed past, at least 100 towering trees behind Hu Feiyun came crashing down as they were cut down in unison. Hu Feiyun was momentarily dazed before she suddenly came to her senses, and leaped to her feet. She wiped her tears, sobbing. Why are you attacking me? There was an aggrieved expression on her pretty face. This. Ling Han smiled bitterly, and said, I thought you were a ghost. I'm not a ghost. Hu Feiyun exclaimed as she frantically shook her head. However, her expression suddenly became fearful, and she asked, There are ghosts here? She was so frightened that she had already started to tremble. Ling Han was unable to fathom how a young girl like her could become the 9th king and command respect from both the left and right ministers as well as the 7 generals. He chuckled, and replied, Probably not. It means there's a chance. Hu Feiyun apparently liked to stubbornly delve into such ambiguities. Even if there are ghosts, there's nothing to be afraid of. Ling Han smiled, and said, as the saying goes, A clear conscience should not be afraid when a ghost comes knocking. Ah. Stop talking about it. Hu Feiyun's pretty face instantly turned pale with fear. I've poured laxative into the spiritual liquid that I've served my sisters before. I'm going to be plagued by ghost. Woo woo. Ling Han was rendered speechless for a short while. In the end, he could only try to console her, and said, "It's fine. Such kind of action isn't severe enough to attract the attention of ghosts. Do you think that ghosts are all so idle? How do you know if ghosts are idle or not? Have you seen ghosts before?" There was a hint of curiosity on Hu Feiyun's face as she continued to tremble in fear. Ling Han was almost driven crazy by her. He hurriedly changed the topic, and asked, "Ninth King, why were you crying here by yourself? Where are your 3 guards?" Hu Feiyun immediately started crying again upon hearing his question. "Ting Qin and Yun Rong, they're both dead," she sobbed. "Woo woo. They were only eaten by an evil beast because they were trying to protect me." Ling Han was startled by her words. Based on the Empress of the Chaotic Star's majestic empire's fondness of the Ninth King, the 3 female guards that she'd assigned to her were definitely not ordinary. In addition to cultivation levels of peak stage low extreme, they had definitely also raised their battle prowess to the level of 3 or even 4-star geniuses through secret techniques. However, the 3 of them were still no match for their opponent. Just how powerful was that evil beast? Its battle prowess was at least at the high extreme. Perhaps it had even reached the late stage or peak stage of the high extreme. Otherwise, there was no way it could kill all 3 guards and leave no survivors. If Ling Han came across such an existence, his only option would be to flee as well. There was still a chance that a level 2 godly metal could be damaged by someone with a battle prowess of the high extreme. Moreover, his spirit hadn't improved significantly, so the 7-kill subduing soul technique would most likely have little to no effect as well. Protecting you was their duty. Now that you're safe, they're also able to rest in peace. Ling Han consoled her. Woo woo. But I'm still really sad. Hu Feiyun sobbed as she wiped away her tears. Okay. You'll ruin your beauty if you keep crying. Ling Han wasn't good at comforting others. In addition, when compared to Hu Niu, it seemed like Hu Feiyun was the child, and Hu Niu was the adult. However, it seemed like this remark was fairly effective on Hu Feiyun. She hurriedly wiped away her tears and straightened her face to keep herself from crying. She took out a mirror and looked at her own reflection. Then, an aggrieved expression appeared on her face, and it seemed like she was about to cry again. I really have become uglier. No, you haven't. You're extremely beautiful. Ling Han hastily took out some food and handed it over. Here, have some food. If she was Hu Niu, she would definitely grin widely and forget whatever had happened. However, the Ninth King wasn't a glutton, and her expression didn't relax a single bit. Then just sit here and wait, Ling Han said. When the time comes, you'll naturally be able to leave. No. Hu Feiyun immediately jumped up and grabbed onto his sleeve. I'm scared. I don't want to be alone. She looked extremely pitiful, like a little girl who was trying to get things to go her way. Ling Han found it hard to fathom that such a person could become a super elite who'd command seas and waves in the future. However, the previous 8 kings had all broken through to the heavenly body tier. Following this pattern, it was only natural that she broke through to the heavenly body tier as well. Fine, then how about you follow me, Ling Han said with a nod. He couldn't stand Hu Feiyun's eyes, which seemed like they could speak. Fortunately, this woman was more of a childish and naive type. If she was a flirtatious and enchanting type, she would definitely be able to bewitch someone to death. Thankfully, he could pass her off to Shui Yenyu when he arrived at Crimson Lake. Hu Feiyun breathed a sigh of relief upon hearing Ling Han's words. However, she wouldn't let go of his sleeve no matter what. It seemed like she was scared that he would suddenly run away. Ling Han sighed, and brought the little bum beetle along with him. Luckily, they were quite close to Crimson Lake already, and the journey would only take 1 day or so. Chihu. After walking for a short while, a rugged mountain road appeared before them. At the same time, the harrowing call of a beast reverberated from the mountain peak. It seemed as if the beast was announcing its territory. It's that evil beast. Hu Feiyun instantly shrunk toward Ling Han in fright. Don't go over, you'll be eaten. Can't you say something more positive? Ling Han pondered for a moment before saying, our aim is merely to pass through this place, so we don't need to clash with that demonic beast. We can try to make it through stealthily. Hu Feiyun frantically nodded in agreement. She was indeed very lacking in courage. The mountains here rose and fell, and acted as quite the perfect natural shelter. The duo hid behind the many rocks as they passed through this mountain, and when they left, Ling Han saw a peculiar beast lying on the mountain peak. It had the figure of a wolf, yet there was a pair of gigantic black wings on its back. It also had 3 heads, 1 gold, 1 silver, and 1 red. Its appearance was incredibly bizarre. Even though they were already so far away, Ling Han's glance still triggered a reaction from the demonic beast. One of the wolf heads instantly looked over with an expression of disdain. It didn't move any further, yet another beast wolf by its side took flight. Its appearance was similar to the demonic beast, yet its size was much smaller. Moreover, it only had 2 heads, 1 silver, and 1 red. The silver head was also much smaller, reaching only half of the size of the red head. The 2-headed flying wolf soared toward Ling Han and Hu Feiyun. Behind it, there was a shadow of 2 mountains and a river. Chapter 956, Battling the Demon Wolf. Chapter 956, Battling the Demon Wolf. 2 mountains and a river. This represented the middle stage of the medium extreme of the mountain river tier. 2 wolf heads meant medium extreme, so did 3 wolf heads mean high extreme? Even Ling Han stood no chance against such existence. In fact, there was even a possibility that his godly physique could be torn to shreds. No wonder the 3 guards assigned to Hu Feiyun by the Empress of the Chaotic Star's majestic empire were all killed. That demonic beast was indeed far too powerful. However, middle stage of the medium extreme? Ling Han didn't flee. Instead, he was brimming with a boundless fighting spirit. That beast had wings, and it was also at the medium extreme. How could they escape if no one obstructed its advance? Ling Han still had a trump card in form of the Black Tower, thus, he wasn't flustered by the demonic beasts. Rather, he took out a bow and arrow. Facing off against such a powerful demonic beast, it was just the right time for him to test the might of the annihilating Dragon Star Arrow's ultimate arrow. What should we do? What should we do? Hu Feiyun was already running around in panic. Surprisingly, however, she was loyal enough not to ditch Ling Han and flee by herself. Of course, there was also the possibility that she had been scared silly, so much so that she had forgotten to flee. Ling Han activated his Eye of Truth and locked onto one of the demon wolf's heads. Then, he drew his bow, and the profound meaning of the ultimate arrow circulated in his mind. He gathered all of his focus onto the body of the arrow. Wang. Amazingly, the divine pattern on the arrow lit up even without the addition of blood. This divine pattern was extremely unique, and it could only be activated and release a devastating might when it came into contact with blood. Even origin power couldn't suppress this arrow, and it had the ability to obliterate even godly physiques. However, now that Ling Han was channeling his full power into the arrow, it actually lit up in advance. Ling Han's mind became devoid of other thoughts, and his eyes also stopped seeing other objects. His attention was solely focused on the demon wolf that was racing over. Shio. He released the arrow. A feeling of exhaustion instantly swept over his body. His body was like jelly, and sweat trickled down his body like a small stream. If it hadn't been for his sturdy physique, it was very likely that he would have already plonked on the ground by now. The ultimate arrow witch was imbued with all of his essence, energy, and spirit was fired out. How powerful was this arrow? Shua. The arrow tore through the air as quickly as a meteor. The demon wolf was astonished, and it beat its wings in a desperate attempt to evade. However, it was already too late. With a plop, the arrow penetrated the left eye of its red head and sunk all the way to its wing. Pa. Its red head was instantly obliterated. Crimson flames blanketed the sky as raging flames burst from its violently severed neck. In fact, these flames even burst onto the silver head of the demon wolf, causing it to shriek loudly in agony and frantically beat its wings. It didn't die. Is this because it still has another head? When fighting against such demonic beasts, must one decapitate all heads to kill them? The vitality of this demon wolf was far too immense, and it furiously glared at Ling Han with its last remaining head. Its eyes were glowing with hatred. Ling Han loaded his bow again. The demon wolf let out an angry howl as it abruptly turned around and fled back toward the mountain peak. Ling Han immediately plonked to the floor. How could he still fire another arrow? He had merely been faking it just then. Unexpectedly, the demon wolf actually fell for his bluff due to its relatively high intelligence. If it were one of the fearless demonic beasts that he had killed before, it would charge regardless of whether it was stronger or weaker. Ling Han felt completely drained. Both his stamina and origin power had hit rock bottom. The might of the ultimate arrow was indeed overwhelming. However, it came at the price of instantly draining his power. After injecting all of his power into the arrow to imbue it with the might of a godly arrow, Ling Han, who could ordinarily exert a power on par with the early stage of the medium extreme, was finally able to achieve a destructive power on par with the late stage of the medium extreme. Otherwise, the arrow would have never been that powerful. I've surpassed 6 stars. Ling Han was extremely pleased. 5-star geniuses only existed in legends. However, he had already reached the level of a 6-star genius. Although part of the reason was the godly arrow itself, one had to remember that he had only just reached the low extreme. If he stabilized his cultivation level a little, he would be able to generate a 6-star destructive power even when using ordinary godly metal arrows. Howl. Upon seeing the small beast become injured, the large demonic beast flared up in rage. Its 3 heads roared toward the sky, and even at such a long distance, Ling Han and Hu Feiyun could still feel a wave of terrifying pressure. Whoosh! It flapped its wings as it soared into the sky and streaked after Ling Han and Hu Feiyun. Its flapping wings were like bolts of lightning. It would be futile even if Ling Han were at full strength and could fire another annihilating dragon star arrow, to say nothing of his current state of feebleness. There was a whole 2 minor levels of difference, and the joint peace planet definitely didn't have anyone who could surpass such a large difference. Ling Han only had a fraction of a second to make a decision. Don't resist my divine sense, Ling Han shouted to Hu Feiyun. He had a fairly favorable impression of the 9th king. She was innocent and kind, and he was also indebted to her as she had once gifted him the Jade Sun pill. He couldn't bring himself to watch her die in the mouth of the demon wolf. To his surprise, Hu Feiyun still had the time to roll her eyes at him at this moment. "Why are you so aggressive?" she asked pitifully. Where did Ling Han have time to explain? He hastily unleashed his divine sense and wrapped it around Hu Feiyun. Peng! His divine sense bounced back toward him. This was a sign of resistance. There was only one last method if he still wanted to wrap her in his divine sense. That was, he had to knock her out with his 7-kill subduing soul technique, and then pull her into his black tower. That's not a bad option, either. At least she'll be kept in the dark. Otherwise, with her innocent personality, she'll definitely spill the beans if someone were to probe a little. Ling Han immediately unleashed a spiritual attack. Unexpectedly, however, a pink barrier materialized around Hu Feiyun's body, and forcefully reflected his divine sense away. At the same time, a terrifying aura radiated from her body, and made Ling Han feel as if he were a tiny and insignificant ant. This aura. It's quite familiar. It's the Empress of the Chaotic Star's majestic empire. The Empress definitely cast some secret technique on her to protect her divine sense. However, isn't it having the opposite effect right now? Boom! The speed of the large demonic beast was incredible, and it caught up to them in the blink of an eye. Its mouths expanded and then opened as its 3 heads glared at Ling Han and Hu Feiyun. Dozens of golden light swords shot out from its golden head. Meanwhile, threads of white silk sprayed out from its silver head and formed a large net. The silk threads were thin and dense, and they radiated a cold and ghastly glow. If one came into contact with them, they would most likely be sliced into several pieces. The red head spat out columns of flames. These flames were incredibly hot, and even level 1 godly metal would probably melt under the intense heat. Ling Han didn't have any other option now that things had come to this. He could only hide into the Black Tower by himself. Otherwise, he would die alongside Hu Feiyun. Such a death would be completely meaningless. However, just as he was about to enter the Black Tower, he heard a humph from Hu Feiyun. Her voice was surprisingly frosty, and it was brimming with the overwhelming might of a ruler. Peng! The blanket of attacks in the sky instantly vanished. At the same time, the demon wolf heavily plunged to the ground. It was completely unmoving, as if it had been scared to death. Ling Han was stunned as he turned to look at Hu Feiyun. The frosty humph just then definitely didn't belong to Hu Feiyun. Rather, it belonged to the Empress of the Chaotic Star's majestic empire. There was definitely no mistake about it. That Empress was far too dazzling, and it was impossible to forget her demeanor and voice even if one had only seen or heard her once before. However, Ling Han was stumped as to how the Empress of the Chaotic Star's majestic empire had borrowed Hu Feiyun's body to launch an attack and suppress a demon wolf at the high extreme of the mountain river tier with a mere humph. Chapter 957, Crimson Lake. Chapter 957, Crimson Lake. The Empress of the Chaotic Star's majestic empire was at the consummate level of the heavenly body tier. Thus, suppressing a demonic beast that was merely at the high extreme of the mountain river tier was an extremely simple task for her. The problem was, how far away from here was the Empress right now? Did she leave a wisp of divine sense on Hu Feiyun's body? Or did she cast some other secret technique on her? Ling Han shook his head in his mind. To the best of his knowledge, the immortal realm didn't have any such secret technique. Otherwise, why did the left minister need to search for Tang Feng? If he attached a wisp of his divine sense onto his beloved daughter and left a secret technique on her, then wouldn't venturing this place be like walking over flat ground? However, Ling Han was certain that it was the Empress of the Chaotic Star's majestic empire who had just made a move. The Empress of the Chaotic Star's majestic empire indeed lived up to her position as one of the 3 rulers of the joint peace planet. She possessed abilities that ordinary people did not. At this moment, Hu Feiyun turned around to glance at him. It was clearly the same face, yet her aura was completely different. She was emanating the might of a ruler, and this caused Ling Han's breathing to falter slightly. Cold sweat dripped down his forehead. This definitely wasn't Hu Feiyun. Instead, she was the Empress of the Chaotic Star's majestic empire. More precisely, the Empress of the Chaotic Star's majestic empire had taken control of Hu Feiyun's body. An icy glint flashed past Hu Feiyun's eyes. Her killing intent instantly became material, and shredded the surrounding space apart. However, after a brief moment of hesitation, she eventually didn't take any further action. The petrifying aura vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "Huh! When did this evil beast die?" Hu Feiyun suddenly exclaimed. Her voice was filled with surprise and confusion. Ling Han looked up, only to see that Hu Feiyun had already returned to her innocent and naive self. It was as though she had absolutely no recollection of what had just occurred. Strange. Ling Han suddenly felt that the Ninth King didn't merely have a sisterly relationship with the Empress of the Chaotic Star's majestic empire. Instead, it was likely that their relationship ran much deeper. It was even more likely that there was some big secret hidden behind their relationship. Thus, the Empress of the Chaotic Star's majestic empire had thought about killing him to shut him up just then. In the end, however, she didn't. Of course, even if she did attack, Ling Han could always hide into the Black Tower. "Ling Han, did you kill this evil beast?" Hu Feiyun's large eyes were sparkling with gratitude as she looked at him. "This is great. You've avenged Ting Qin and Yun Rong's death." She was extremely moved, and she continuously shook one of Ling Han's arms as she spoke. The pitiful Ling Han still hadn't recovered from his feebleness yet, so Hu Feiyun's strong shaking caused a wave of dizziness to overcome him. "Calm down. Calm down. There's still another demonic beast," Ling Han said hastily. Hu Feiyun was instantly given a small fright. Her actions were jittery as she hurriedly turned around to look at the mountain peak. However, that small demon wolf had seen Hu Feiyun's prowess, and it was also missing one of its heads right now. Its power had already fallen to the middle stage of the low extreme. When it saw Hu Feiyun look over, it thought that she was planning to finish it off. It frantically beat its wings and fled into the distance. Hu Feiyun breathed a long sigh of relief. Thank heavens you disposed of the large evil beast. Now, even this small evil beast is afraid of you. It's afraid of you, okay? Ling Han said in his mind. However, he didn't argue with her, and said, I need to recover my strength. We'll set off after that. Millimeter. Hu Feiyun eagerly nodded her head. Ling Han swallowed an alchemical pill. However, he didn't have any cultivation techniques of the mountain river tier right now, so he was unable to extract spiritual qi to actively speed up the process of his recovery. He could only passively wait for his origin power to be replenished. As it turned out, the recovery of his physical strength was a much easier process. All he needed to do was rest for a short while. I blundered. I didn't prepare a cultivation technique of the mountain river tier in advance. Ling Han retrieved a true origin stone, and almost instinctively absorbed the spiritual qi that was contained within it. Although this process was quite slow, it was still better than doing nothing at all. After a full 6 hours, he was finally able to replenish all of his origin power. Hu Feiyun naturally wouldn't collect spiritual meat by herself. How could she partake in such a bloody activity? Moreover, mountain river stones were rare, but spiritual meat was definitely no special item in her eyes. Ling Han didn't hesitate, and cut the spiritual meat off the 3-headed flying wolf. It was as large as a finger, and gave off a fragrant and alluring smell. Let's go. The two of them continued their journey toward Crimson Lake. After several hours, a crimson-colored lake finally appeared before their eyes. There wasn't a single ripple on the surface of the lake, and it appeared much like a congealed pool of blood. At the same time, it also appeared like a blood-colored crystal. Is this Crimson Lake? Better off calling it Blood Lake or Red Crystal Lake, Ling Han said mockingly. He and Hu Feiyun were not the first ones to arrive here. There were numerous people sitting cross-legged near the bank of the lake, and there were even some people who were venturing toward the center of the lake. There were 4 sets of floating stones each running along a different direction in the lake. Each set formed a snaky path that led toward the center of the lake. At the center of the lake, there was a very small island. The face-up side of the stones was all cut very neatly, and each stone was placed roughly 3 meters apart from the next. Those venturing toward the central island all stood on one stone before attempting to leap toward the next. To cultivators, a distance of 3 meters was nothing. However, this didn't appear to be the case here, and the cultivators all huffed with exertion after jumping from one stone to the next. Sweat trickled down their faces. Plop! Someone fell into the lake, and immediately started wailing in agony. He swam toward the bank as if his life depended on it, and it could be seen that his body had already become a bloody mess. It seemed as though the lake water had an extremely potent corrosive quality. That person consumed medicines and channeled cultivation techniques, yet the flesh on his arms and legs still fell off piece after piece. His white bones gradually became visible, yet even these started to show signs of corrosion. The corrosive ability of the lake water eventually stopped at the bones. However, that person had already become completely unrecognizable. There were bloody holes on his face, chest, and abdomen, and his brain, heart, intestines, and other internal organs had all become clearly visible. It was an extremely horrifying sight. Ling Han. Shui Yenyu briskly walked over upon noticing his arrival. There was a relieved expression on her face. You've finally arrived. Ling Han nodded, and asked, what's going on here? There's a small island in the center of the Crimson Lake, and there is a total of 4 paths that lead toward it, Shui Yenyu explained. The paths are those floating stones that you can see. However, there are astonishing gravity fields on those stones, and the further one ventures, the stronger the gravity field becomes. Only now did Shui Yenyu see Hu Feiyun. She hurriedly bowed, and said, my respects to the 9th king. She was slightly astonished by her own actions. Upon seeing that Ling Han was safe, she was actually so moved that she even ignored the presence of the ninth king. Hu Feiyun waved her hand and said, "No need for the formalities." Her actions appeared especially casual. Meanwhile, Ling Han asked, "Are there mountain river stones on that island?" "Indeed." Shui Yenyu nodded and said, "Although mountain river stones might exist in any location of the mystery realm, it's certain that they exist on the island in the Crimson Lake. Moreover, the mountain river stones that exist here are ones with special attributes." "Oh, so what's the special attribute of the mountain river stones here?" Ling Han's eyes lit up in delight. "Extreme weight," Shui Yenyu replied. Ling Han nodded and said, "Then I'll definitely have to obtain a few." Shui Yenyu couldn't help but shake her head. "Even if you succeed, you can only obtain one mountain river stone at a time. Not to mention, it's extremely difficult to reach the island in the center. In addition, the gravity fields that you experience will become much more powerful on your second attempt to reach the island. In fact, they become more and more powerful with each ensuing attempt. Only an extremely small number of people is able to succeed once, not to mention succeeding more than once. However, if fortune favors you, ordinary mountain river stones might appear on the floating stones as well." "They do appear occasionally." Ling Han grinned widely. "I'm no ordinary person." Shui Yenyu immediately rolled her eyes in a charming manner. She had never seen someone as shameless as Ling Han. However, Hu Feiyun nodded in agreement. She believed that the three-headed flying wolf had been killed by Ling Han. Thus, she naturally viewed him as a celestial, and held a blind trust in his power. Chapter 958, Zhaolun's Achievement. Chapter 958, Zhaolun's Achievement. "You have to be careful." Although Shui Yenyu wasn't a fan of Ling Han's smugness, she still warned him. "You also saw just then. The lake water is overflowing with corrosive power. If you're pushed off the stones by their gravity fields, you'll be severely wounded even if you aren't killed." Ling Han nodded in understanding. He had seen the might of the lake water, and even he didn't dare pat his chest and guarantee that his level 2 precious metal physique would be able to resist its corrosive property. After all, he hadn't personally experienced it yet. "If someone has wings, can't they directly fly over?" he asked curiously. Demonic beasts could shapeshift into human form when they reached the immortal level. They could even mate with humans and have half-human, half-demonic offspring, which would also have special abilities. For example, they could have fish gills and be able to breathe underwater, or have wings and be able to soar in the skies. In the immortal realm, such beings were called half-humans. "It would be great if it were so easy." Shui Yenyu shook her head and said, "The higher one is, the more potent the force of the gravity field. Otherwise, you could simply expand into a gigantic form and stride onto the island in a single step." "True." Ling Han smiled and nodded. To elites of the immortal level, expanding or shrinking their body 100-fold for a short period of time was no difficult feat. If one could stride onto the island in a single step, then this lake and island would have lost their meaning. If that's the case, then it's obvious that someone has purposefully laid this out as it is, he speculated. Did a great elite of the Genesis tier really lay things out here in the past? Perhaps, Shui Yenyu said, nodding. That was already a matter from hundreds of millions of years ago. Who could survive for so long and live into the current age? Anyway, 100 million years was merely how far back history could delve. Perhaps this mystery realm had existed since a long, long time before that. "Forget about it," Ling Han said. "Regardless of who created this place, I'll give the stone path a shot first. Be careful." Shui Yenyu warned again. Meanwhile, Hu Feiyun was brimming with confidence. Ling Han will definitely succeed. Ling Han laughed loudly, and acted as if he were going to pinch Shui Yenyu's pretty face. "Your tone is becoming more and more like you were my wife." Shui Yenyu cussed as she hurriedly dodged Ling Han's hand. "What can you expect from a hog but a grunt?" Ling Han strode toward one of the lake's bridges. It's that brat." His appearance instantly attracted the attention of a few people. Two youths instantly walked over with their arms wrapped around their chests. They stared at Ling Han coldly. Ling Han swept his gaze over them, and also recognized who they were. Before entering the mystery realm, Shui Yenyu had already told him about these individuals. One of them was called Yi Wenshan, and another was called Tang Hua. They were both students of the Northern Institution, but they weren't members of the Shattering Void Tier Division. Rather, they were students of the Low Extreme Division. Their ranks were very high as well, with one ranked at 480, and the other ranked at 522. In addition, they also had another identity. That was, they were the subordinates of Bai Yuanxi, one of the three great followers of Zhao Lun. In simpler terms, they were the lackeys of Zhao Lun's lackeys. Junior brother Ling, this is not an easy path to cross, Tang Hua said. Each floating stone is slippery and inhospitable to the feet. In addition to that, there are also the extremely powerful gravity fields. You've got to be careful not to fall into the lake. That's something that could easily melt you to death. If I were you, I'd rid myself of any thoughts of advancing, Yi Wenshan added. Ling Han flashed a smile, and said, no need to provoke me. Since I've already walked over, I have no intention of giving up halfway. On the other hand, if senior brothers want to target me while I'm crossing, and for example push me off the floating stones or something, let me warn senior brothers in advance. Be careful of becoming victims of your own evil deed. Anger flashed across Yi Wenshan and Tang Hua's faces. This ant from the small world actually dared to threaten them back. You think you're on top of the world just because you broke through to the mountain river tier? Tang Hua sneered. In a short while, you'll realize just how laughable your belief is. The two of them stopped talking, and merely continued to glare at Ling Han. They would follow him whenever he started to advance forward. Then, they would push him into the lake. As such, they would also have an excuse afterward. The gravity fields on the floating stones were immense, thus, it was very understandable if they lost their footing. Ling Han naturally knew what they were thinking. He chuckled coldly in his mind as he confidently strode forward. Wang. His body suddenly felt a lot heavier when he stepped onto the first stone. His hair and clothes all sagged downward. These were things that usually didn't experience much gravity. Now, however, there were extremely evident changes. This was enough to show the power of these gravity fields. Ling Han unleashed a tiny bit of his origin power, and his speed barely faltered as he strode onto the next stone. As he did so, the gravity field became a few degrees stronger. Clacking sounds could be heard as his bones collided with each other. In total, there were 100 stepping stones. If the second stone was already this powerful, then how terrifying was the stone at the end? Plop! Ahead of him, another person fell into the water. They frantically swam toward the bank, and naturally, their state was a horror to look at. Motherfucker! The gravity fields here are so bloody freakish. Can people truly reach the island? Someone shouted. Of course they can. Just cast your mind to 10 years ago. The Western institution's Pang Yu succeeded in reaching the island. If we go further back, senior brother Zhao Lun also succeeded a few hundred years ago. Not only did he succeed, but he was also able to obtain 2 mountain river stones in a row. What? 2? Don't the gravity fields become numerous times more powerful after one has succeeded once? Indeed. That's why the strength of senior brother Zhao Lun is unfathomable. Gasp. Senior brother Zhao Lun was already freakishly powerful to begin with. Now that his refined 2 extreme weight mountain river stones, just how terrifying has his battle prowess become? Many people were rendered speechless at the mention of Zhao Lun's great name. This was a godlike male whom they could only look up to. His lofty standing was not something they could dream of reaching. Do you guys know that senior brother Zhao's 3 great followers Bai Yuanxi, Zhou Xiao, and Fan Yong have also obtained a mountain river stone from here before? What? Numerous people had never heard of this secret information before, and their minds all became numb with shock. Even his followers are that freakishly powerful. Otherwise, what right do they have to become followers of senior brother Zhao? In the end, an elder concluded, it's not impossibly difficult to obtain a single mountain river stone from this place. Every time, there are a dozen or so people who are able to complete this feat however, in the past 500 years, only one person has managed to obtain 2 mountain river stones. Fuck. Many people clasped their heads in shock. No wonder Zhao Lun had the title number 1 prodigy in 1,000 years. His strength was indeed a long way ahead of other prodigies. Ling Han's mind was calm, yet a feeling of pride welled up in his heart. Zhao Lun could obtain 2 mountain river stones here? Then he would obtain 3. He raised his foot, and steadily took his 3rd step. Yi Wenshan and Tang Hua weren't in a hurry to make their move. They were both waiting for Ling Han to walk further first. That way, Ling Han would receive more severe wounds after he fell into the lake. In fact, there was a possibility that he wouldn't make it back to the bank, and even his bones would be dissolved into nothing. Before long, however, the expressions on their faces changed. Why is he running so fast? He's already crossed over 30 stone steps. They exchanged a glance, and didn't hesitate any longer. They raised their speed and hurriedly chased after Ling Han. It was evident that their aim was to knock him into the lake. Chapter 959, Hoisted by One's Own Petard. Chapter 959, Hoisted by One's Own Petard. Since Yi Wenshan and Tang Hua were excellent students ranked 480 and 522 in the Northern Institution's Low Extreme Division, they were naturally at the peak stage of the Low Extreme. Moreover, they were both 1-star geniuses, and their true battle prowess was on par with the early stage of the Medium Extreme. They had already tried their hand at it before, and advancing 80 steps was the limit of their abilities. Thus, even though they did face some pressure before this limit, they still had the energy to perform some other actions. For example, pushing someone into the lake. Shoo! They speedily leaped forward. The floating stones weren't overly small, and they were large enough to fit one person comfortably. However, it would become a little crowded if 2 people stood on the same stone, and 3 people definitely wouldn't be able to do so. Like a sweeping breeze, Yi Wenshan and Tang Hua drew closer and closer to Ling Han. A cold smile crept across their faces. "You're about to run out of luck. Out of our way," they roared in unison. They leaped once more, and hurtled toward the nearby Ling Han. Ling Han had been waiting for this moment, and launched his fists toward their faces without as much as a single glance backward. He didn't hold back, and a small mountain river appeared behind him as he unleashed his full power. Pu! The people around the lake all burst in laughter. They had seen all kinds of mountain rivers before, but they had never seen one this small. Shui Yenyu was even more confused. Ling Han had been so powerful in the shattering void tier, so how had he become so weak after breaking through to the mountain river tier? The size of one's mountain river directly correlated to their power. "You're seeking death." Yi Wenshan and his Tang Hua both wore malicious smiles. Ling Han had only just broken through to the mountain river tier, yet he actually dared to clash with them. He truly didn't know the spelling of the word die. In fact, they even held back a fraction of their power so as not to directly crush Ling Han to death. Crushing a junior brother to death under the watchful gazes of everyone was quite a large crime. Peng! Peng! The 2 people's arms were easily pushed aside by Ling Han's fists. Meanwhile, Ling Han's fists were barely affected as they continued hurtling toward the 2 people's faces. What? The 2 of them didn't even have the time to cry out in alarm. However, the expressions on their faces said everything. There was shock, bewilderment, and terror. He had only just entered the mountain river tier, and his mountain river was also so small. How could he possess such terrifying power? Before this thought had finished flashing through their minds, a fist had already smashed into their faces. As though they had been belted by a god tool, the flesh on their faces started rippling like waves. Then, tooth after tooth came flying out of their mouths. Afterward, even their bodies started to flail about like ragdolls. After drawing a long arc through the air, both of them landed in the lake with a loud plop. They instantly shrieked in pain, and started frantically swimming back to the bank. Their skin and flesh started dissolving at a rate that was visible to the naked eye. Even when they channeled their origin power at full strength, the effect was only minimal. They were only able to delay the dissolving of their flesh by a short moment. Everyone was dumbstruck by this sight. Who could have envisioned this result? Although Yi Wenshan and Tang Hua were only ranked in the 4 and 500s, one had to realize something. Just how many students did the low extreme division of the Northern Institution have? Almost 500 students could enter the Northern Institution every 20 years, and it would take them a maximum of 100 years to advance to the low extreme division. Also, just who entered the Scarlet Heaven Academy yet couldn't break through to the Mountain River tier? In other words, everyone could advance to the low extreme division. However, it would become especially difficult to advance starting from here. Taking tens of thousands of years to break through to the medium extreme was a common sight. Of course, the Scarlet Heaven Academy only accepted prodigies. Thus, one would be expelled from the academy if they couldn't break through to the medium extreme within 10,000 years. Even with the assumption that one would only remain in the low extreme for 5,000 years, the number of students in the low extreme division would still exceed 100,000. So, was being ranked in the top several hundred out of 100,000 impressive? Converting this number, such ranks would be equivalent to ranks of top 20 in the Shattering Void tier division. However, Ling Han had sent them flying with a mere 2 punches. He was far too powerful. More importantly, he had only just entered the Mountain River tier. He was already so powerful now, so how powerful would he become in the future? It's rumored that this person from the small world passed 8 levels of the Academy's assessment, meaning he has the potential to become a 4-star genius. If he has the potential of a 4-star genius, that means he'll have a battle prowess on par with the early stage of the medium extreme upon breaking through to the low extreme. No wonder he's so strong. But don't Yi Wenshan and Tang Hua have battle prowesses at the early stage of medium extreme as well? And there's 2 of them. No. They obviously didn't know how powerful Ling Han was. They underestimated him, and didn't use their full power, so of course they could only eat the fruits of their own evil deeds. I see. Everyone nodded in agreement. First off, Ling Han was indeed strong. Second, Yi Wenshan and Tang Hua had both underestimated their enemy. This allowed them to breathe sighs of relief. Although 4-star geniuses were freakish, at least they were still within their realms of acceptance. However, there were also some who fell into deep thought. It was clear that Ling Han had only advanced into the immortal level after refining Mountain River stones. If the distance between the early stage and middle stage of the low extreme was represented by 100 steps, then he was at most only standing on the first 10 steps right now. So, would his battle prowess reach the level of a 5-star genius when he arrived at the 100th step? It wasn't likely, but it was possible. This was the most terrifying part. 5-star genius. Just thinking about it was enough to make one quake in fear. Ling Han turned around. In his eyes, he had merely swatted aside 2 flies. In any case, his target wasn't these 2 people, nor was it Bai Yuanxi and Fan Yong. Rather, it was Zhao Lun. He continued forward, and his advance was still relatively relaxed. Just his power alone had already reached the early stage of the medium extreme. This was especially advantageous as what good was a powerful battle prowess in this place? The best way to resist these gravity fields was naturally one's own power. Thanks to the restriction on cultivation level, how many people here could compete with Ling Han's power? Moreover, in addition to having outstanding power, Ling Han had an even more terrifying physique. Under the pressure of the gravity fields, others had to protect their hearts, brains, and other vital organs with their origin power. Otherwise, these organs would be mercilessly crushed by the immense pressure of the gravity fields. However, Ling Han didn't need to do this, as his physique was already on par with level 2 godly metal. How could the gravity field hurt him? Thus, everything was fine as long as his power could stand up to the weight of the gravity fields. 60 steps, 80 steps, 90 steps. He walked at a brisk pace, and only slowed down after reaching the 90th step. A look of exertion appeared on his face. Indeed, only 10 or so people could reach the island and obtain a Mountain River stone each time. This was definitely no easy feat. Sweat rolled down Ling Han's forehead. Chong, chong, chong. His godly bones clacked, and his skin also trembled slightly. The gravity fields became increasingly terrifying, and tried to rip his skin and snap his godly bones. However, Ling Han's footsteps remained firm as he continued to walk forward. "Fuck. This guy's a freak," someone by the lake shouted in astonishment. Everyone nodded in agreement. Freak was the only word that could describe the advancing male. After all, there were a few locations in this mystery realm which produced mountain river stones. As a result, those who entered were scattered in several places. Although people had already arrived at the Crimson Lake 3 days ago, they all had yet to reach the island and obtain a mountain river stone. However, it was evident that this was about to change. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.